This Saturday episode of New Politics was released on the 22nd of August, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wongal and Gadigal people.
What does the Liberal Party actually stand for anymore? And can it survive the Christian extremists who are threatening to take it over? A new corruption scandal is swallowing up the Liberals in New South Wales, and we're witnessing the continuing collapse of a major political party. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And if you're listening in and haven't subscribed to our website at New Politics, you're missing out on half of what we do. There's regular articles and analysis of this strange world of politics. It's all free, and you can subscribe at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, if you do want to support us, it's just $5 per month at Patreon and Substack, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
As a corruption probe started into the Liberals in his home state, Angus Taylor spent the week dodging questions from afar. He jumped around different spots in Queensland, then headed to Western Australia. He couldn't have got further away from New South Wales, where public hearings at ICAC were underway. The state's corruption watchdog is investigating whether Liberal political operatives took money from banned donors, didn't declare it, and whether the donations were above legal limits. ICAC is investigating a subgroup of the right called the Reformers. They're a hard-right religious group. The probe focuses on payments made to the Reformers, donations allegedly used to recruit their kind of Liberals, a power grab at the expense of the centre-right.
The political fortunes of the Liberal Party seem to be going from bad to worse, and what it's going through at the moment isn't just a one-off downturn that fits into a political cycle. I think it's pretty clear that they are facing an existential crisis. Now, they've had two disastrous federal election defeats, with probably one more to come in 2028. They still can't decide whether their political fortunes will depend on coming back to the centre of the mainstream or moving further to the right. They're at the centre of a corruption investigation in New South Wales, which is threatening to swallow up their leader, Angus Taylor. And also on top of all of this, they've got a very dysfunctional administration. The scale of the collapse of the Liberal Party is actually quite extraordinary, David. The coalition received 41% of the primary vote at the 2019 federal election, and that was just 7 years ago or two election cycles ago. And recent opinion polling has got it down as low as 17%, and that's absolutely abysmal. Now, the Conservative part of its voting base has moved over to One Nation, while the moderate part has shifted over to Labor, the Greens, Community Independence, which means that there's not too much that's being left behind. It seems to me that the Liberal Party just doesn't seem to know who they represent, what the problems are that they want to solve in society. They've also got a political corruption case that's going on behind the scenes. They're not even close to winning government again, and it just seems like they've forgotten how to be a serious political party.
It's very sad. People get surprised at me thinking, don't I want the destruction of the Liberal Party? And I want their policies to be crushed. I do, though, acknowledge that it's, depending on how you time it, 80 years nearly of consistent ideological and political achievement. Whether you agree with that achievement or not is a whole other thing. But it is a party that has, for better or worse, represented a large part of Australian political interest. Now, should it have? That's a whole other debate which we've held across this podcast since we started. But the party of Menzies, the party of all those great giants, is now reduced to leaders who we've had three in a row, four, except one was Prime Minister. And we could even go back to Abbott, who just weren't up to the job, who did not quite get what the public expects from their centre-right party as opposed to their centre-left party. And I know that people out there now stating that they're not centre-right or what have you, but just work with me here for a sec, because that's another debate too. But what people expect from the right wing of the very centrist Australia, how's that, is different to what is being presented. Now, Taylor, having looked at Rosny, now I'm not accusing him of any wrongdoing at all. It's people who he is factionally involved with who look like they're in a lot of trouble. Rosny started off as an investigation about funding through Catholic schools to a group called the Reformers. Charles Perrottet, the brother of ex-Liberal Premier Dominic Perrottet, is in it up to his neck. He received payments for which nobody can quite tell us why he received those payments. And he doesn't remember receiving the payments. I'm pretty sure I'd remember receiving $12,000.
I'm very sure that I would remember receiving $12,000 from anyone.
Yeah, I'd probably even remember who gave it to me. And it's exploded into a much more liberal. They're trying to get rid of the public servant David Chandler. For some reason, they don't like him, probably because he stops them doing stuff. There's all kinds of shenanigans going on. And Angus Taylor is closely involved with some of these characters as factional ally and as a colleague. Again, ICAC isn't investigating him, and I make no allegation of wrongdoing by him, but he's part of the frame. Whether he can survive this or not, as things get more and more pointed, they've now demanded phone records, and one of the main witnesses has admitted to doing a hard factory reset on his phone, which of course wiped all data, which might have...
Well, that's a coincidence, isn't it? And very convenient.
It's a little bit reminiscent of Darryl Maguire running the tractor over the laptop. But basically that the Liberal Party has got to this. These aren't minor figures traipsing around the edges. This goes straight to the centre of the federal party. And I don't know that Angus Taylor has the experience or the political skills to be able to extricate himself from this type of stuff. John Howard, no problem, could have done it easily. Malcolm Fraser wouldn't have been involved.
Oh, of course, but I think, we've mainly been focusing on the leadership of Angus Taylor at the moment, but 6 months into his leadership, well, he's just failed to establish any sort of authority at all, either over the party itself or within politics, and he just doesn't seem to be getting much discipline within the party. He hasn't been able to develop a political identity that's very clear to the electorate. He's also making the mistake of previous Liberal opposition leaders, and that is to develop a strategy for winning the next election, which I guess once you become the leader, that's what you're hoping to do, but they've actually got no hope of winning the next election. So they're focusing on winning the next election instead of trying to rebuild the party for the long term. Now, I think that will be far more sustainable. The Labor government's problems and the unpopularity of the Prime Minister, well, that should be creating a lot of opportunities for an opposition on housing, productivity, living standards, cost of living. And it's clear that the voters can be disappointed with Anthony Albanese while still feeling that the coalition is an unacceptable alternative. Both of those things can be true, but I think the problem for the Liberal Party is much bigger than Angus Taylor. He can, of course, be a part of that problem, but the Liberals, I don't think that they've accepted why they lost the past 2 elections and the last one quite badly. And it seems to me that they think that all they need to do is change the leader, which they did 6 months ago, without changing anything else, and the voters can see right through it.
Yeah, and they could learn lessons from the Labor Party. For all our criticisms of the Albanese government, Anthony Albanese is unchallenged. There's no obvious successor. I know that names come up and go as to who might succeed him, but names come and go, but it's never serious. It's always the press trying to create drama because they've got to create drama in a 24-hour news cycle. We haven't yet had the major scandals. I know that there's stuff bubbling on the outside with some ministers. They've been able to be contained. I've said this before, the alleged hatred between, or definitely dislike, between Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek hasn't resulted in damaging leaks against the Prime Minister. When you look at Gorton, for example, where Billy McMahon leaked every time there was a cabinet meeting, McMahon was straight on the phone to his favourite journalists telling exactly what happened and who did it and what have you, which undermines Gorton's prime ministership.
Or Tiberius of the telephone.
Tiberius of the that's right. And so what the Labor Party is showing is extreme discipline. The Liberal Party isn't. Now, there's not enough of them to show a disciplined fight. And, of course, we can be really fair and say the Liberal Party's always been about the individual and you're allowed to have your own opinions, etc. But there's not that steady hand, that John Howard figure. The Liberal Party needs an Anthony Albanese who can settle things, who can focus things. And again, let's be fair. And those of you who've heard this podcast will realise I'm not saying, the Albanese government is the most perfect manifestation of a government ever. It's got its good points, sure. Hello to all the ministers and staff who listen. But it's got areas in which it can and should be criticised. That doesn't take away from the fact that it's an extremely disciplined and an extremely competent party machine. And the Liberal Party is just a rabble. They clearly don't like each other. Angus Taylor was never the right choice, but he gets in.
Well, maybe he was the only choice at that point. That's
maybe
one other consideration.
Yeah, and maybe he was. Hastie is too on the nose from the right. Each time he gets a little bit of traction, particularly the Western Australian media jump on top of him and say, no, till you recant what you said about Ben Roberts-Smith, you will never be leader of the party. After then, we have Jane Hume, and she's in the Senate. In the lower house, it gets even more.
Yeah, but I guess it's not so much who the leader is. And the leader, I don't think, even needs to necessarily get traction within the electorate or within the community. They have to look at the Liberal Party and just assess what needs to be done. And it's like they've got some brickwork going on there, although the house is made of straw at the moment. They're doing all this patchwork. They're just not prepared to put the cement in the brickwork there. They're just trying to put all of this stuff together and it's all falling apart so easily. What they need is a leader who's prepared to restructure the entire organisation from the branch structure all the way through to the top. And that's the sort of leader that they need at the moment.
And I'll use this advisedly because I know we have our listeners out there who disagree with this. But the great Liberal leaders, even if we retain great as to the electorally successful, Menzies reshapes the party. Fraser reshapes the party for as long as he can. Howard reshapes the party. Now, were these good things? Were these bad things? There is no doubt that the Liberal Party came out a very different party in 1996 as it was in 1976. There's no doubt that the Liberal Party of 1946 was different to the Liberal Party, which was then the United Australia Party. But I think we can see it as a straight line because the party, it may change its name, but it's the same philosophical approach. A party of people who want a centre-right government as opposed to a centre-left government in Australia. And that's been the whole Australian political debate. Do you want a little bit more welfare, a little bit more collectivism, a little bit more government help, or do you want a little bit less? And that's essentially in Australia where we argue. Given in some countries, the arguments are much more critical in terms they're willing to go to war. We live in a very lucky country, to paraphrase and misquote Donald Horne.
Also, every political party does have problems, but it seems like in Australia it's the political party that has the least amount of problems that will have the most success. And the issue for the Liberal Party is that it's just got too many problems going on at the moment. It's got the relationship with the National Party, which is severely strained. Their state divisions, their basket cases in most divisions around Australia and state and territory politics. The other point is that the religious right is becoming more organised and starting to push the party towards this sort of weird type of conservative populism, which isn't really that popular. And you referred to Operation Rosny before at the New South Wales Corruption Commission. Now, we have to point out again, Angus Taylor is not himself under investigation, and he does deny making the payments that he's been accused of making in the evidence that's been provided. But the main issue that has been coming up at the New South Wales ICAC has been that relationship between the conservative Christian group known as the Reformers. And this Reformers group, they're seeking to control the branches of the Liberal Party in New South Wales. They're seeking to control pre-selection so they get their own people in. And the upshot is that they want to change Liberal Party policy on abortion, voluntary assisted dying, transgender issues and same-sex marriage. And I thought all of these issues had been resolved within politics and within the community some time ago. But this is what happens when you've got a weakened party that's starting to fall apart. This is when you get those extremist groups trying to take over the party. And the fact that this reformers group is now at the centre of a major corruption inquiry probably tells you everything that you need to know about these people.
Yeah, and the most successful political leaders in Australia who have had religious beliefs. And we live in a country in which we don't really mind. We've had Catholic prime ministers. We've had Protestant prime ministers. We've had senior Jewish members of cabinet. We've had senior Islamic members. We've had atheist prime ministers, at least two. A lot of our prime ministers too were Paul Keating was nominally Catholic. I don't think he would ever disparage the church, and he probably went to Mass on occasion, but I don't know that he was the very model of how to be a serious Catholic worshipper. And Kevin Rudd, another example, whose faith, he wrote knowledgeably on theology and his Bonhoeffer and all of that. And the faith becomes somewhat of a structure without being the defining, we can't allow this because it's against my faith. And that, to me, seems to be the smart thing. John Howard was a little bit less overt in his personal beliefs. Malcolm Fraser, Robert Menzies were very staunch Protestants. But again, they didn't allow the Protestantism to overtly shape policy. They allowed it to be part of the framework of the policy. And it becomes an interesting thing. Of course, our most interesting...
Well, it's very difficult for a Prime Minister to inflict their religion across the entire party. They can try, but it's going to be very difficult to do that. I think the problem within the New South Wales Liberal Party is that they won't, if they get the leader who they want, this reformers group, the leader won't need to convert anyone or convince anyone because they're already these right-wing extremist Christian groups already in there.
Exactly. And we've seen what happens when these groups take over in Victoria. The Victorian Liberal Party is almost a rump. Their argument is we need more hardline religion. It's almost survivalist. Get your guns and build your bunker and get the 6 months worth of tin food and the apocalypse is coming. There may be an apocalypse coming. I suspect it's not the one you're expecting, but okay. The people whose religion has distorted their view of the real world. I'm not here to disparage anybody's personal religious beliefs, but we can start to criticize ideas when they start to impact on public life. And so taking a very narrow view of the Bible and what becomes an ahistorical view of the Bible, and then trying to impose that on a population that in the last census, not the one we've just done because those haven't been released yet, there were more people with no religion or a different religion than people who identified as Christian. And of course, Christianity is a very broad church. So they're not governing from a small power base. Their policies just don't appeal. And this is why the Victorian Liberal Party is a basket case. It's a very American thing too. Statistically, someone pointed out that there's no way every single president and every single member of the American government could be Christian. It's just not statistically right. That there are no atheists. That's just not statistically possible in such a group. And we need those views. Yes, absolutely go and worship in a lawful and correct way. Absolutely. But if you don't want to, you shouldn't be forced into it because it fulfills some idealized notion of how society should work. Society is messy.
This is New Politics, independent analysis of Australian and international politics. For more free articles and analysis, join us at newpolitics.com.au.
By law, the owners cannot live in these houses. So all this ban is doing is stopping new houses. These communist-style taxes are crazy. Well, no one's buying anything in Australia, and no wonder, because everyone feels like we're living in a communist state. Our priority is to beat the communists, okay? That's our priority. So we're all working together. Is your question, would we support a target for particular workers?
For the Albanese government set a target for 1.2 million technology workers.
It sounds like communism to me, to be honest with you. But I don't need to confer with colleagues, but I mean, I don't think we set targets for like that. It's, again, sounds very communist, but I quite like him.
You embraced the idea yesterday that some of the homes built under the 80-page code would need to be basic homes, perhaps without energy efficiency standards of 7 stars and other amenities. Are you suggesting that to afford housing, some low-income Australians will have to accept housing that is substandard?
Yes, definitely. And I think we've got to be clear there are trade-offs here.
Now, unless you've been hiding under a rock, housing for most people is one of the biggest political issues and has been for a few years. And I think this represents a big political opportunity for the Liberal Party. Now, it's an issue that brings together migration, planning, construction costs, intergenerational inequality. There's a wide range of issues that are going on there. And it should be easy or quite easy for an opposition to pick up one of those issues and run with it. But the Shadow Minister, Andrew Bragg, he's got a different kind of answer to all of this. His solution to housing issues is to reduce the National Construction Code, which would reduce the quality of housing. And then he went on to suggest that lower income Australians should accept substandard housing. And this to me just seems to be Liberal Party philosophy in a nutshell, David. Reduce regulations even when they're absolutely necessary. And if you're on a low income, well, you can go and get stuffed and go and live in a tent if you have to. And substandard housing, well, all that does is it makes housing more expensive in the long term through inefficient buildings, which result in higher energy bills. There's more maintenance costs as time goes on. So it's pretty much a false economy. It might be good for developers in the short term, but it's very bad for the people who end up purchasing those houses. And Andrew Bragg is supposed to be a moderate within the Liberal Party, but during the week he also said that compulsory superannuation is repressive. It's all communist and neo-Marxist. It's all run by the unions, even though unions don't actually own any superannuation funds. But this rhetoric of calling everything communism and Marxism, if you don't like it, that's coming straight from the US Republicans. And Donald Trump's been using it a lot quite recently. He's in a lot of troubles at the moment politically, so he brings up communism and Marxism all the time. Now, that might get some traction in the United States, David, but in Australia, it's pretty much a meaningless rhetoric that not many people would understand or even be caring about.
Yeah, exactly, Eddie. It works if you have a language of this type of stuff, which we don't anymore in Australia. Now, the 1930s in particular was a very bitter and virulent anti-communist time. 1950s was almost as bad. We remember the 50s a bit better than the 30s. There were other things going on in the 30s. But we had all kinds of shenanigans going on in the 30s. And in America, it's the shadow of that old crook Ronald Reagan, who was there when the Cold War ended. Saying that he ended the Cold War gives him way, way too much credit. A couple of rhetorical flourishes, well delivered, let's be fair. Rhetorical flourishes do not a victorious warrior make. In Australia, this stuff doesn't work because we just don't have the language for it. So when Andrew Bragg comes out and says, superannuation is communism, how? Superannuation was bought in part to take pressure off the pension system so that less people might be able to access pensions while still maintaining a comfortable retirement, so that we pay money into basically private funds who manage them and hopefully manage them well enough that we accumulate enough to be able to retire on without having to rely on the pension. That's one of the most uncommunist things we could do.
Well, it's also ridiculous rhetoric. No one comes home and says, I had a really bad day at work. It's all because of communism, or the boss is a communist. They'll say that the boss is a fascist or a psychopath, but no one will come home and say, the boss is a communist.
No. He
neo-Marxist boss.
Well, look at this. I'm now driving a nicer car because he redistributed to a communist. It is, of course, ensuring that people aren't looking at the real issues. It's those that are causing the problems, detracting or diverting attention to those who aren't really causing the problems. So, yeah, we can blame communists. What communists? Oh, yeah, Albo's a communist. Is he?
Well, if only.
And it becomes ridiculous, and they're helped by a fact that there's a media propping them up who prefers this rhetoric. And I don't know why we have to follow this American playbook of reducing the intelligence of public debate. Things are better when we all lift. And it does mean that we all should go off and get Bachelor of Arts degrees, although that would probably help. But it does mean that when we get people to think a bit more clearly, we get better debate, we get better policy, we get better political parties. Never perfect. They're still human organisations, but certainly better than this engine is woke. It broke down. My car broke down the other day. It's because the radiator hose was woke.
Or even worse, a communist radiator.
Communist woke radiator broke my engine. Oh, the ocean is woke. It's communist. I went swimming and it was really rough. Communists. It
is ridiculous, but that's what I mean when we opened up by talking about the Liberal Party not being a serious political player, and this stuff about everything being communist or woke or neo-Marxism, that's just an indication to me that they're just not playing out as a serious party. But I think the bigger danger for the Liberal Party, it's not all this sort of stuff. That's a side issue, and it's also not even another federal election defeat if that's what happens in 2028, which is more than likely, because we've always had political parties that have had long runs of election defeats. The Labor Party, for example, but they're still around. Liberal Party's had a few electoral defeats as well in the past. They're still around. So to me, that's not the big issue, although if you're a supporter of a political party, you do want to be in office at some point, but it's that ability for the Liberal Party to act as some kind of moderating force within politics. And I realise that a lot of our listeners couldn't care less if the Liberal Party completely falls apart and just disappears. And in its current form, I'm probably one of those people. But there has always been that belief that a good opposition will result in good government. But I think the other side of that coin is that a bad opposition will result in bad government. And I think at the moment we've got a federal government that's responding more to what One Nation is doing rather than what the Liberal Party is doing. And for the Liberal Party, it's never going to be just something about that numerical difference in Parliament. So Labor's got 94 seats, the Liberal Party's got 42 seats. That's still a certain amount of people, or to be a political force if you need to. It's about the quality of the people that are there, and there's just not much going on there. But
it's about the quality of the message. And
that's right. You've got to have a good message to put out to the public. But
there's no compelling reason for the person on the Clapham omnibus, to use the old English, to vote for the Liberal Party.
Well, that's right. But I think that everything that we've been talking about today, the next big electoral test is coming up in Victoria. That's in a few months' time in November, and the Liberal Party is currently leading the opinion polls down there, but it's got the relatively inexperienced Jess Wilson as its leader. They do also have to gain 17 seats to win government there. So I guess the point is that a lot of what we're saying today will be tested at that state election in Victoria, but even then, they've got the same issues that the federal Liberal Party seems to have, and that doesn't mean that they can't win that state election in Victoria. We've seen a lot of bad oppositions get into office because the government was really on the nose. I don't know if the Victoria Labor government is on that at that point at the moment, and maybe that's another big issue. In a two-party political system, someone has to win the election. But in Australia at the moment, it seems like it's who's the least worst that wins the election rather than who is the best.
Yeah, and for a while there, terrible election campaigns were winning federal governments. The Tony Abbott, where they had the fake tradie and Tony nearly hitting the reporter from Channel 7, and all of this in a sane system would have been absolutely career-ending. Now, all this stuff did accumulate, and we are now in the position where we are now. And I think in a way it's a good thing, because it means that money isn't the only factor that again, in the States, whoever raises the most money essentially wins, because you can get access to television advertising and better staff, etc. In Australia, the more money doesn't necessarily guarantee you a win in the way it does in the States. And they want to change it to that here. Again, I'm going to continue to advocate for fully publicly funded elections. You've got to pay for your first one, but you'd be limited into how much you can spend on advertising and how much donations you can get, etc. But once you've shown that you're serious, in inverted commas, because ridiculous candidates might work from time to time for certain electorates, but that you've got a serious following, okay, you can continue to participate in the system. If you don't get that, you'll have to start again, because that separates the adults from the children. I suspect under that system, we'd see a lot less of One Nation, who are currently being funded by all kinds of people, allegedly, apparently. You wouldn't see much of Clive Palmer, who is another proof that throwing a bunch of money in an election in Australia doesn't give you the cachet that it does in the States. Clive Palmer probably would have won some seats in the United States, given his approach. But in Australia, he had the most skipped ads on YouTube ever. And in fact, I think it helped get people to subscribe to YouTube just so they didn't have to watch the ads. So the Liberal Party needs strong, solid and credible reform, not to move towards the reformers and the brethren and that One Nation and try and win that over. It needs to look at what is it that Middle Australia wants that the Labor Party isn't supplying at the moment. And when they find out what Middle Australia wants is free healthcare, cheaper registration, stopping the privatisation. That's the existential crisis. Yeah, the end of neoliberalism. And that's what we're seeing. Labor adopted neoliberalism wrongly, but it always tried to ameliorate it in its defence. The Liberal Party never did. It only ameliorated it when it had to. And it's why Australia's in the position it's in at the moment, but it's also why the Liberal Party is in the position it's in at the moment.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.